Welcome everyone to this session with Brett Catlin at Alaska Airlines. We have a lot that we're going to talk about with the carrier's route networks, some recent additions, some future movements. As many of you know, Alaska Airlines joined One World at the end of March earlier this year. And since then, and I guess even before then, Alaska's been on an expansion spree, adding more frequencies, adding more cities to its route networks, growing out some of its other hubs. So I'm really excited to talk today with Brett. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Yeah, Jay, we really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure to speak with you and to get to interact with your audience. So we appreciate the time.
Yeah, so I want to start with some of the more recent route network developments because those have been pretty exciting. You know, you've added new cities like Cleveland and Miami. How would you categorize those routes? Are they more about One World feed, or are they more about like naturally growing out the Alaska Airlines network that were on your target list before and that you're just getting to now?
Right. Yeah. Last week, as you noted, we announced Miami, which was our 100th destination nonstop from Seattle. The week before, we announced Cleveland, which was our 99th destination. I would characterize this as really developing the Seattle hub. It's the largest on the West Coast. It has been for a number of years. And so with these two additions, it really rounds out our network. We serve essentially every domestic market with more than 100 PDU a day, perhaps maybe excluding one. And so the strategy here in Seattle is to build a robust network, both to feed our own services, but also to feed those of our One World partners, including American Airlines, who is building an international hub here in Seattle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the one a week trend would be amazing if it could continue for the next year or so. But anyways, understand that. So as you think about then other parts of your network out of Seattle, you know, we've spoken in the past and you've kind of mentioned that you're looking a little bit more at adding frequencies, building out some depth. How much more work do you think you have to do along that line?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And I'd say Cleveland and Miami were outliers to our depth versus breadth strategy from when we spoke a few months ago. It was kind of rounding out the portfolio of destinations, but we're squarely focused to your question on building depth, not only here in Seattle, but also in markets like San Francisco, Los Angeles, Portland, even up in the state of Alaska. Specifically here in Seattle, what we're doing and what you'll already see on our schedules next summer is we're trying to get every market up to at least 2 flights a day. That will take time, particularly with transcon flying that is intensive in terms of aircraft utilization and crew hours. But you look at our network next summer and Cincinnati, Columbus, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis, Raleigh, Durham, they'll all operate twice a day. Those are relatively small markets in terms of local demand, 100 to 200 people a day. But we think with the feed network here in Seattle, being at 2 daily allows us, one, to again feed our own domestic network, but two, to offer a much more compelling proposition to our One World members. To give you a specific example, next summer we'll operate Orlando 3 times a day. For the first time, that flight will connect in both directions very cleanly with Japan Airlines service to Tokyo. And of course, Tokyo to Orlando is a large O&D market, no nonstop service. So when we think about developing the Seattle hub, it's definitely about feeding those international long-haul services. And we're trying to recruit new carriers to Seattle all the time, and having the network is a key piece of that.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, heading a little bit south to San Francisco, that's also a very big One World city. Qatar Airways recently came in there. A lot of your recent codeshare additions have been out of San Francisco. How are you thinking about your strategy there, especially, you know, when you compare to maybe like in LA or a Portland or a Seattle, you're not necessarily as major of a player. You don't necessarily have all of the infrastructure that you have in some of those other hubs.
Yes, San Francisco is an important market for us. It has been even before the Virgin America acquisition. In terms of our go-forward strategy, we really set the network contours that we want for San Francisco and where and how we want to compete. And so at this point, it's about making sure that we have quality schedules that appeal to corporate travelers and leisure travelers alike, that we have the right frequency to be competitive, recognizing that we're a distant number 2 player in the San Francisco market. And so it's more about fine-tuning the contours of the network and the schedules than it is about dramatically changing what it is we're trying to accomplish in the Bay Area. But an important part of that, similar to Seattle, is ensuring that we do have connectivity with One World carriers. We, of course, would love to have every One World carrier fly to Seattle. It is the biggest hub on the West Coast and a great place to connect. But when you think about one of our partners like Qantas, which was amongst our largest pre-pandemic, and we think will return to being a large partner next year, San Francisco is a key gateway for them. They obviously have a huge hub in LA, not a hub, but a huge gateway in LA. But San Francisco offers, we think, a much better connecting opportunity with a carrier like Qantas in terms of the facilities, the ease of navigation, and everything that comes with that. So we really see Seattle and San Francisco and LA to an extent all complementing each other in terms of offering flow to our One World partners. And as you noted, building up that code share portfolio is really table stakes. That's the foundation that we need to build on. And so we've been active the past 18 months, really since we joined One World over almost a year ago, in building up those code share markets such that when demand does come back, and it is coming back now, that we're ready to go and we're positioned to take advantage.
Yeah, that all is a really great point that you make, especially in a lot of these larger markets. But I think sometimes that what gets lost in Alaska Airlines, people think about the coast, but you also have a large presence in some of the more inland cities. One example that comes to mind is Boise, super interesting market. And it's been a growing market, but Alaska, you've kind of had your first pick of everything because no one else has really been doing the kind of growth you've been doing there. How are you thinking about a city like Boise, where you have a large origination market, people know you, but it's not really a massive connecting market? What is your network going to look like there as you think about the next few years?
Yeah, it's Boise, I think, first off, is a market that we're really excited about for a variety of reasons, which I'll come to. But ultimately, when we think about the network structure in Alaska, we have 5 hubs: Anchorage, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. Those 5 hubs consume about 90% of our capacity. So that's the core of our focus. And I mention that because we also are investing in places like Boise, San Jose, San Diego, our 3 focus cities. But our strategy is distinct and different in each of those. So specifically to your question on Boise, it's more of a clean slate. Nobody owned Boise pre-pandemic. We were the largest player, but we really only flew to Seattle and Portland, maybe some seasonal service into markets like San Diego, but we hadn't built up the network breadth in Boise. And the pandemic and demographic shifts gave us the opportunity to really look at Boise differently. We have a great partnership with the community, an excellent relationship with the airport. They have a great competitive structure in terms of cost per enplanement. I think it's $4 or $5 a passenger, which when you compare it to Seattle or Portland, upwards of 20, that makes a big difference. And so great demographic trends in Boise, low cost infrastructure, a lot of open canvas to grow the network. And that's exactly what we've been doing. You saw us add Chicago and Austin, our first East Coast flights, or eastward directionally flights out of Boise. East Coast would be a bit of a liberal interpretation. We also built up California, San Francisco, San Jose, Palm Springs, LA, San Diego. So at this point in the Boise market, we offer 50% utility, which is up almost 30 points from pre-pandemic. We've also, to your question, added markets like Pullman, Idaho Falls, Phoenix, Las Vegas. We're building up Spokane to Boise. We think ultimately, while it's designed to serve the local community, there's also flow opportunities. A market like Spokane to Vegas, it's circuitous to go via Seattle or Portland, but a lot of our guests in Spokane, they want to fly on Alaska Airlines to Vegas. Or folks in Pullman want to fly on Alaska Airlines to San Diego, and they don't necessarily want to connect via Seattle. And so we do see the potential for some targeted connectivity over Boise, which we believe can grow over time as well. But our focus right now is building a great network for local Boise originating traffic.
Mm-hmm. And when you think about then some of these hub cities, like San Diego, I think is a great example where you do some longer flying out towards the East Coast. Do you see opportunities to maybe build some of that out, like, in a city like a Boise?
Yeah, absolutely. I think certainly if the hubs comprise 90% of our capacity, the 3 focus cities, that's the 5 to 10 year opportunity. You start to make tactical investments today, and as the markets mature, as we understand the direction we're going post-pandemic, those become almost call options for future growth. And so we are being very deliberate and measured in a place like San Diego, playing to our strengths. So that's adding markets, which we've done during the pandemic, like Bozeman, Kalispell, Jackson Hole, Redmond in Oregon, markets where we already have strength, connecting them into San Diego. That's been a successful strategy thus far. And then also looking at markets in the Northeast, where there isn't a strong San Diego kind of hub or focus city-based carrier that serves it. So Boston, Newark, JFK, those are all markets that we believe we're uniquely positioned to serve from San Diego. I think JFK is one that we're really proud of out of the gate. We're twice a day in JFK right now out of San Diego, a morning departure and an evening departure. and that market's working really well for us. So we do think there's demand from San Diego to build up Northeast flying. We'll do it deliberately and over time, but ultimately we want to offer a really compelling proposition in San Diego. We offer already 30 nonstop destinations, and we think there's room, again, over time to build that.
Sure. And, East Coast, I think one of the largest airports, just from traffic standpoint, is JFK. And Alaska's had a pretty sizable presence there. But a recent move that I think raised some eyebrows was the pulling out of JFK LAX. I was wondering if you could shed some color on that. And do you think that's specific, were there issues specific to that route that led it to being cut, or is it more of kind of a revamping or rethinking of how you're going to do these premium kind of transcontinental routes?
Yeah, JFK LA it was an important market for us, certainly dating back to the Virgin America acquisition. Pre-pandemic, we had started to think about our JFK portfolio in New York City more broadly, inclusive of Newark. I think the reality in JFK is Alaska Airlines had 12 slot pairs. Only 4 of those slot pairs were for evening arrival and departures. And so if you're a West Coast-based airline like Alaska, the flight that people want leaves at 8 a.m., whether it's Seattle, San Francisco, LA, and then comes back off the East Coast at 5 p.m. Of our 12 slot pairs, only 4 of those allowed those West Coast originating day turns. And so the issue that we had as Alaska Airlines pre-pandemic is we were stretched really thin into JFK. We were operating Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, San Jose, and Los Angeles. So we had 5 gateways with only 12 slots, 4 of which were day turns. And what that meant is we had sub-optimized the schedule. We didn't have a quality schedule really from any of those gateways, which left us exposed to competitors with much better slot portfolios, better holdings, more flexibility. And so it was a really difficult decision. The solution was ultimately, if we exit JFK LA, then we can invest in building a great schedule, JFK San Francisco, JFK Seattle, JFK Portland, JFK San Diego. And so what you see now in a market like San Francisco is we operate 5 daily, so more than we did pre-pandemic. This is as of March of next year. 2 of those will be day turns, a RON, and then 2 red eyes. And so it's a really high quality schedule that I would stack up against any of our competitors. And ultimately, when it's a level playing field in terms of schedule quality, we believe our product is competitive and we're positioned to win. And so that was really our play in JFK. It was disappointing to exit JFK LA. It's an important market, but we did at the same time really double down in LA Newark. We'll offer 4 daily flights next summer. And we think in partnership with some of our One World carriers like American that operate JFK LA, guests, corporates in particular, will still have a choice if they want to accrue a mileage plan, if they want to stay kind of in the Alaska family and need to travel JFK LA.
Yeah. So do you think Newark kind of is an opportunity for you? Do you think Newark is just a near-term strategy in terms of some of your transcons? Because you do have a pretty sizable portfolio to Newark at a time when a lot of other legacy carriers don't necessarily do the kinds of work that you're doing there.
Yeah, we're excited about Newark. I think really having a focused network strategy, and this is true for all of our destinations, and then having discipline around that strategy is a recipe that works for Alaska. When we've done our best in terms of winning guests, building a high quality business, delivering industry leading margins, it's when we were disciplined and focused. And so in a market like Newark, we do want to grow over time, but we also want to have consistency. And as opposed to kind of a scattershot network approach, we want to build depth in a market like LA Newark, Seattle Newark. Well, it isn't slot controlled in the same way JFK is. We need evening departures and arrivals. And so that peak 3 p.m. to 8 p.m., which is obviously a DOT proceeding right now on some slots that Southwest vacated, we're very interested in those. We're interested in growing Newark, and we see long-term potential in that market.
Yeah, I want to turn now a little bit to just more general, broad route network strategies. Something that we've seen during the pandemic has been, or the return, really the recovery, has just been how fast leisure travel has come back and how important leisure travelers are. As some of your business customers also start to come back, how are you thinking about your route network in terms of a business versus leisure kind of standpoint? You mentioned taking Orlando to 3X daily, which is more of a leisure market. Is there like a happy medium, maybe 50% of your capacity you want exposed in leisure versus business? Has that kind of changed over the last couple of years, how you think about it?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think when we think about the network during the pandemic, the pivot was obviously to leisure. The lack of demand was an existential threat to Alaska and really airlines globally. And so we did what we had to do to find the demand that existed, and leisure was where it's at. So we pivoted our network. We tried to do it in a way that still played to our strengths, anchored to the West Coast. We didn't go and open up a mid-con base or add a bunch of East Coast flying. We did it in a way that worked for Alaska while still leaning into leisure opportunities in places like Florida, Latin America, Hawaii. Those are markets, and we added almost 70 new markets during the pandemic that we do want to develop over time. It isn't in one day, out the next. We see them as long-term opportunities, or we wouldn't have launched the flying. But ultimately, business is an important part of our network. We don't see the long-term balance of business and leisure flying to be dramatically different than it was pre-pandemic. It's obviously coming back in terms of capacity at different rates. Leisure a bit faster than domestic, than business. But when we think about, call it April of next year, we think there will be an inflection point, at least in Alaska's network, where we focus on really serving business customers again in a way that we did pre-pandemic. And so time will tell if the timing works in terms of next spring. But with what we know today, we think that's a prudent strategy to start to build back business markets where we had a beachhead pre-pandemic. And we know when corporates come back, they're going to want to fly on Alaska Airlines. And so we just have to make sure we're ready with the right frequency, the right schedule, and a good overall offering that attracts the corporates back to our airline.
Yeah. That's actually a really interesting take. And we've seen some of your larger competitors have said they're looking to maintain a little bit of a larger leisure footprint moving forward. So when you think about then your leisure kind of gateways and where you're flying to, there's a lot of it is obviously devoted into Mexico. And, in the context of San Francisco, where you've added the 3 new routes to, I believe it's 3 at least, new that'll start this December down there. Do you think that perhaps in the future you might want to have are you thinking about depth in the sense of you want some little more exposure in those markets as well? Do some of those stay really at one or 2 times a week moving forward?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up. So San Francisco, Mexico, that's a heritage market for Alaska. We flew many of the routes that will be resuming in the next month, dating back to 2007, 2008, before the great financial crisis. So well before the Virgin America acquisition. So us re-entering 4 markets, Cancun, Mazatlan, Loreto, Zihuatanejo. Those are all markets that we've served out of LA for a long time. We're the largest carrier. We think there's a great opportunity to better serve the Bay Area in those particular locales. And I think to your question, Jay, while we're operating markets like Zihuatanejo once a week on Saturday only, we do offer connectivity other days a week over LA. And depending on how the market performs, we certainly see that as an opportunity to add frequency. Again, we don't see it as an immediate need. We want to be pretty targeted in serving the demand that exists. And these are our smaller markets. We call them mini beach markets. And so we want to be thoughtful over time and build it up. But one of the broader strategies for Alaska is we do our best in terms of performance in the summer. I don't inherently think that we can't perform better in winter in Q1. That's kind of been our Achilles heel in January and February. We would build up losses that we would then have to work back the rest of the year, the next 10 months. And so coming out of the pandemic, we do want to perform better in January and February. We think that's a network opportunity for us to take some of the capacity we want to have in the summer in places like Seattle and the state of Alaska, and then to pivot it to California, LA, San Francisco, Mexico during January and February, and to seasonalize the network a bit more. So I do think you'll see us doing that out of the pandemic and trying to be more like carriers that are more nimble. You think about Sun Country, and they have some of their best months in January and February. From a network perspective, a geographic perspective, there's no reason Alaska Airlines can't really deliver a great seasonal performance in the winter, taking folks from cool, wet climates to sun destinations.
Yeah. I want to turn a little bit to something that's brings in a little bit of the fleet discussion. Alaska is moving forward heavily with the 737 MAX fleet. And those planes, have an impressive amount of range. So if you look at what some carriers in Canada are doing, WestJet or Canada are both going to use them on some transatlantic hops, 6-7 hours. Some of your Alaska flights are naturally that long. I'm thinking Seattle to Miami in the most recent context. So that's easily a 5-6 hour flight. When you think about a plane like that has the capabilities that it has the range that it has, do you think that that's something of interest that you want to start branching into some longer routes that you couldn't do previously?
Yeah, look, we're thrilled to have the Dash 9 in our fleet. We're almost up to a dozen aircraft. We will be, I think, later this year, early next year. It's a great aircraft. Boeing is a tremendous partner of ours. We hope in the next few years to have well over 100 of those aircraft. Ultimately, we need to figure out the composition. Is it all Dash 9s? Do we take some Dash 8s, potentially Dash 10s? Each kind of subfleet or variant of the Dash 8 offers a different opportunity, a different network proposition. But to your question, Jay, we are excited about the range profile, particularly of the Dash 8, and what that can mean for our network as we build it over time. We've long looked to places like Central America and Northern Latin America and said, well, what if we could operate those markets from LA? We do well in the traditional visiting friends and relative markets like Guadalajara. So there's nothing to say over time we couldn't build up a beachhead elsewhere in Central America that an aircraft like the Dash 8, the Dash 9 would open up for us. I think there's also opportunities out of the state of Alaska. You saw us add 6 new markets from Anchorage over the past couple of years. So Salt Lake City, Minneapolis, San Francisco, Phoenix, Vegas year-round, Denver, there's all kinds of markets. And so when we think about developing our network, we want to be more relevant in the summer, taking people to the state of Alaska. We're already the largest carrier, but we know there's demand from other points like New York, Dallas, Houston, really all over the continental US, that we can take people into the state of Alaska and potentially beyond. And so we're keen to do that. We're keen to make sure we're fully utilizing the range profile of the aircraft we have. I think Belize is a great example of that and really pushing the outer envelope of what these aircraft can do. So we'll see what happens over time. Again, we are focused on breadth over the next couple of years, but certainly my team, particularly on the network side, we love to dream about what could be from a network perspective. Think about 3, 4, 5 years out, and we have to be disciplined. We have a fiduciary responsibility to make smart network decisions that deliver economically for the airline. But we still, have those discussions about where could we grow the network over time. And I think for Alaska as a company, you look back to what we did in 2007, 2008, building up Hawaii. That's almost 20% of our business now, and it's a great economic engine. And so we want to find more opportunities like that we can develop over time.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Hawaii because it's where I wanted to turn to next. That is one of, Alaska's most important geographies. I think it kind of also summarized a lot of the leisure and business discussion that we had earlier. But, Hawaii slowly is getting a little more competitive. You see a lot more capacity coming in, some wide bodies, coming in. Do you think that your Hawaii network is about pretty much matured right now? Do you think that you're still kind of in the early stages? How are you thinking about where you want to go in the future in that market?
Yeah, we've built, I think, a really strong franchise in Hawaii over the course of a decade. It didn't happen overnight. We've been thoughtful, deliberate about it for well over 10 years. And so we're really happy with how the network is positioned today. We do operate to Hawaii from 5 of our hubs and 2 of our focus cities: Anchorage, Seattle, Portland, San Francisco, San Jose, Los Angeles, and San Diego. Similar to the rest of the network, we want to build more depth in those markets. I think about Seattle to Honolulu. Pre-pandemic, we were operating 3x. We're 4x now. I think there's an opportunity to be 5x. The same is true in markets in California, San Diego, Maui. We were 1x pre-pandemic. This past summer, we flew it at 2x. And so depth, we think, is really the name of the game in Hawaii. We have built up loyalty. We really listen to the community in Hawaii. We want to be good partners. And so we're keen to thoughtfully grow that market, but we're also really happy with our position today. I think ultimately that the challenge in Hawaii is twofold. It's one of infrastructure, where gates are limited. And so the schedule you can get or you can operate successfully is more dictated by gate availability than it is perhaps by commercial demand and when passengers want to travel. So ultimately, we want to partner with the state of Hawaii on infrastructure. And I think number 2 is competitive. Well, we have a great product to Hawaii that we think will ultimately position us for success, and we believe we have a right to win in that market. There's an enormous amount of new capacity into Hawaii. Carriers are essentially already dumping capacity into Hawaii. They're flying empty planes. That's not sustainable. And so we're committed to Hawaii for the long term, but we also recognize that there does have to be a bit of a shakeout in terms of the volume of capacity that's entering the islands, because there's only, whether it's gate infrastructure, hotel infrastructure, cars, there's only so many people that the Hawaiian Islands can accept in terms of visitors. And we want to be good stewards to our partners in the state of Hawaii, while also protecting our competitive position and setting up Alaska for long-term success.
Great, yeah. We're almost out of time, so I have one more question for you, Whitley. we've seen a lot of kind of surprises in terms of the recovery, is how I'll call it. Things that we didn't see coming, things that we didn't anticipate were going to happen either on schedule, either in terms of where demand materialized. What's something that you either were surprised or pleasantly encouraged by in the recovery that has really changed your view on route network planning for the long term?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think ultimately, while we have incredible data, particularly in the US, given all the filings that carriers make to the Department of Transportation, this business network planning is still an art as much as it's a science. And while we do have all that data that I mentioned and we can make informed decisions, the pandemic, I think, gave us an opportunity to test ideas, hypotheses that we could have never actually done pre-pandemic because the stakes were too high. But in the environment that we had the past 18 months, we could try new things. And I think that was really satisfying. Not every idea worked out, but it gave us an opportunity to see which markets, like a Boise, might actually have more potential than we would have thought pre-pandemic. And so I think that's really the learning for me and my team is how do we develop the network thoughtfully, but not to get so caught up in the pure data that we lose some of the art of thinking about the shifts that are happening around us, demographic or otherwise. I think that'd be point number one. Point number two would be when demand is anemic, you start to see where you have true loyalty. And in a market like Seattle, when we had seats available to sell, when our planes were running 50, 60% load factors, we saw that people wanted to fly in Alaska and not our competitors up here in Seattle. And that was powerful because I think in certain times of year, we realized that we were essentially spilling in ways that we maybe hadn't been fully aware of. And so now as we're growing back Seattle, we want to have 400 departures in the next couple of years from 335 pre-pandemic. It's because of those learnings and understanding where we might have been spilling inadvertently. That's point number two. And then ultimately point number three for us is just the importance of schedule quality. And while you can get away with things where there's unlimited demand and peaks and similar, schedule quality matters a ton, particularly in competitive markets. And so we've really gotten a lot more targeted in how we build schedules that serve corporate players for sure, but also appeal to leisure travelers. So ultimately for us, it's about kind of relearning the art of network planning and where there might be opportunities, making sure that we're not spilling inadvertently, and then three, ensuring that we have really high quality schedules that appeal to the widest cross section of demand.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Brett. Really appreciate talking to you. It's always a joy. Thank you so much for your time today.
Yeah, likewise, Jay. Great catching up with you.